Hello, and welcome to Bold Conversations, an Immune Deficiency Foundation podcast series aimed at advancing knowledge and understanding of health equity. I am your host, Dr. Nicole Rochester, the Immune Deficiency Foundation's medical advisor for health equity and the founder and CEO of Your GPS Doc LLC. I am your host, Dr. Nicole Rochester, and I'm so excited to have a special guest with me today. Today, we are joined by Susanna Raj. Susanna has such a powerful and intriguing story, and she fits in so perfectly to this series because she not only has a personal story about primary immunodeficiency, medical immigration, but she also has some professional ties that are unique and will provide some additional insight. So I'm so excited to have this conversation. Thank you for being here with us today, Susanna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nicole, for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So I read your profile on the Immune Deficiency Foundation's website, and I invite all of the listeners to review your profile as well. And while reading it, I was both intrigued and deeply saddened to learn about your journey to diagnosis. So why don't we start there, Susanna? Can you share a little bit about what it was like growing up in India and how you were ultimately diagnosed with a primary immunodeficiency?
Thank you for asking that question because, I wanted to share that story with the Immune Deficiency Foundation. When they asked me, I believe it was in 2021, I wanted to give them an overview of a perspective that has been missing in the talks, especially in this country when it comes to immune deficiencies, medical, assistance, clinical trials, and all of that. So I was very excited to give that story, but it was a very short synopsis of my entire life. Uh, Growing up in India, as they say, you don't know what normal is because whatever you are used to becomes your normal. So I could never answer that question as how was your life growing up as a child, in India. I really don't know because my normal was being in and out of hospitals, growing up in hospitals, actually hospital corridors, ICUs. None of those things ever intimidate me because that was my natural environment. That is where I grew up in. So I was not, even to this day, going to the ER or anywhere, I never feel intimidated by those environments like other people who get very scared. I am actually the most calmest person there because it's like going back home or something. Not that I love it or enjoy it, but it doesn't intimidate me in the same way as it would other people. So because I had this immune deficiency, I was sick for almost 6 to 7 months out of a year, you can say. So it was always in and out, in and out, in and out. So very few days in a year I was at home. So I do remember the times that I was at home. So that was more rare than the times I was in an hospitals. And I also grew up with medical professionals. So all of that has changed my outlook, my worldview, if you can say. I never have a problem talking to doctors or cross questioning them or, you know, the way that other people have. I don't have that issue because to me, it's like growing up with your uncles and aunts. You never feel, intimidated by them. So that's how that's how my childhood was back in India. Of course, from my parents' perspective, it would have been very much of a nightmare because both my siblings died in the process. And also, there was a lot of financial struggles, constant hospital bills, and all of those things. So it may not have been a normal experience for them, but I, as a child, didn't know that this was abnormal in the sense. Only
Yeah.
when people started asking me as an adult, hey, do you want to have a normal life? When or I have that in the conversation as normal versus abnormal, then okay, my life was abnormal in some ways. It's only then you have that realization, not before.
That makes perfect sense. I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm very sorry to hear about your siblings. Did they also have a primary immunodeficiency?
They had the same chronic granulomatous disease disorder. Um, it's not like they were diagnosed, but um, some of the, after the death, the records and everything were sent here and analyzed. And the conclusion was that they also probably had the same thing. So all three of us were born with that same disorder. And it could have been a genetic, mutation that was passed on and was very strong autosomal recessive gene. And so it probably the same thing, but there was suspicion that, that we had some sort of CGD disorder. There was a suspicion, but there at that time in the 1970s and 80s, India did not have that test. Not so anymore. That's not true anymore. Now we have all those tests everywhere around the globe. You can get tested anywhere at any clinic, but not so at that time. It was only available in few Western countries
I
like
see.
Canada and the United States.
And we're going to move into your kind of medical immigration story and your diagnosis in a moment. But before we go there, can you share a little with the listeners about the hospitalizations, as much as you recall? I know you were young, but do you remember the first time you were in the hospital, how old you were, and what were some of the things that you were dealing with, the types of infections that you were having?
Mostly lung infections, respiratory, upper respiratory infections, and I also came down with a lot of viral infections too. And the viral infections will always lead to back to the bacterial infections because then your immune system is so weak fighting the viral infection. So then you get, suffer through the bacterial infections more often. But mostly by upper respiratory tract infections. My lungs were always infected. There's like multiple scars now. They said like I have like 23 permanent scars in my lungs. So it was a lot of infections as a child. And several days, like 10, 15 days, I would be there and I would have IV antibiotics. So it was the usual, trying to really aggressively take over something that was already like a losing battle. So the doctors were always fighting, on a defensive mode, more like there was no offensive procedures in those days. I mean, you couldn't really take a lot of prophylactic antibiotics, but only in the later, when I was 15, 16, I think they started putting me on prophylactic antibiotics to sort of, be on the offensive more and be more prepared for an infection. But even that didn't work out so well.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for just kind of filling in some of those gaps. Let's talk about how you finally came to your diagnosis. Many of our listeners who themselves have PI or have family members with PI are aware of the statistics that, the average patient, it takes over a decade to get a diagnosis. So we know that that's the norm, so to speak, for patients with PI. But you have some unique challenges by living in India and, as you shared, not having access to some of the technology. So many of our listeners are either dealing with PI or have family members with PI and are aware of the fact that it takes over a decade on average to finally get a diagnosis. So that's sort of the norm, so to speak, in the PI community. But you faced even more challenges living outside of the United States. And as you shared, not having access to some of the technology that is now freely available. So
Mhm.
share with us, you're in and out of the hospital, you're a young child, you're having all of these infections. Two of your siblings had previously passed away. How did you finally get to coming to the United States and arriving at a diagnosis of CGD?
So around when my sister was she passed away at 6 years of age when that was my elder sister. So by that time, they were all three of us were sick in and out of hospitals, being very sick. But when she passed away, around that time, the pediatricians, one of the pediatricians who was a family physician for us, he came to the conclusion that this is some sort of, PI, and he also narrowed it down to CGD, and he said it's possible that these children are infected with that, but since we don't have the means to test it and provide a, prognostic care plan for them, so he tried to navigate the system, like, try to find us places where we could go for a test. And he already had made arrangements at the Toronto Sick Children's Hospital. I think it's no longer called Sick Children Hospital, it's called Children's Hospital. It's a good thing they removed the Sick Children name. So he managed to get us some contacts, and was, trying to get me and my brother to get tested in Canada. I was, my brother is 1 year old younger than me, so I was 7 and he was 6. They were trying to get us there, but around that time, my brother became very, very sick and he passed away just before the flight. So he had to, I went on his ticket actually. It was supposed to be, both of us, but, and when he was sick, the Canadian immigration actually expedited his ticket, and he said he could come with one parent. But when he passed away, my parents appealed to the embassy and said, look at the delay that you guys made, and this is what caused. We couldn't, there was a lot of immigration struggles even at that time also. So there was a back and forth delay. They were not trusting that this was a genuine case. They wanted more proof that, we are not trying to immigrate there and stay in Canada, that it, more medical proof. And at those days, it's not like today where you could send digital copies and, in an email instantaneously. It was more like you have to fax them, and even fax was a big luxury back then. You have to mail them, you have to speed post them, and you have to there is a lag in the communication that is like 10-15 days back and forth. So within that time frame, he passed away. He was so sick. He was in the ICU, and then he said he died from a very bad infection. And there was at that time there was only first, second generation antibiotics. There was no third generation antibiotics. Now we have third generation, and I believe we even have a fourth generation antibiotics now. Not the case in those days. So he passed away, and then that information was relayed back to the Canadian embassy. The Canadian embassy made an exception and said both parents and the remaining kid can come. So we actually went on a special visa, came to Canada in 1982, I believe. And at that time, they had the NBT test. I'm sure you must be familiar with that. Now we have the more advanced tests, but in those days it was just the blue test, where the liquid the blood thing, the test turns blue, and then it is a CGD, or you have a PI or an infection or an immune deficiency disorder. So they did that test. They found out that I had that in Canada. So that's how I managed to get diagnosed at the age of 7. So not true for most people, but in those days itself, it was a big. I mean, having the diagnosis meant nothing. There was no treatment. There wasn't going to be any special drug or anything to help you at that time. Nothing was discovered in that time period. So what they did, that having that diagnosis helped us understand how to protect ourselves in a way. You are no longer guessing anymore. You are like having that ability to understand that, this is how it's going to be, that the entire environment around her It's going to be dangerous for her. You cannot predict which germ will infect what because we are surrounded by germs. We are surrounded by bacteria and viruses. So it gave a plan, a sort of a plan, I would say, but it's not like a really good plan because even the plan that the Canadian pediatricians gave us at the time was skewed towards male children. So their entire database at that point was all on male children uh, whom they had run studies on. And so they were giving us and male children and of course Caucasian male children. So they were giving us data points on that and sent me back home with that knowledge. But it took us 10 years, 10, 15 years to really understand that some of that advice was irrelevant to me as a female child, as an Asian child. It was not working out. And I paid a, I think I paid a huge price for that in terms of mismanaged drugs that were high dosage for me, for my, body structure, and also there's always physiological differences, right? If you're a female versus a male, and then also the fact that you are Asian versus Caucasian, those differences, serious medical mistakes, that the fact that I survived all of them and that I continued to fight through all of it and reach the age of 15, 16, all of that, and cross through that barrier because as you may know, CGD tends to be very aggressive up to your teenage years, and then there is a plateau, and nobody makes through that plateau stage. Most people pass away in that aggressive stage because it's very hard to protect yourself during that time when your immune system is going through that kind of hormonal imbalance as well as, immune imbalance. So yeah.
Wow. Wow, you've really been through a lot, and we're thankful that you're here to be able to tell this story. I want to learn more about the medical immigration process because you and I talked offline, and I say that I learned a lot as a physician. There were a lot of things that you shared that I didn't know. I would imagine that there's a lot of things that our audience don't know as well, and I know that there were some myths as well that you were able to debunk. Can you share how my understanding is you were diagnosed, as you said, there were no treatments initially, you were sent back to India, but then you had an opportunity to come back to the United States. Can you tell us about that and also talk about the process for getting a medical visa?
Yes. So the Canadian visa process, the Canadian visa process for the medical visit that we went there, we went on a special visa, as I told you, like the embassy made a special exception for us, and we went on that visa, and it was in the newspapers and all in the Canada side. Uh, I still have those clippings. I can share them with you later. But during that time, when we were there, you they gave us the opportunity to stay back, actually immigrate, and gave my parents jobs. They said we can find you jobs, we can allow you to stay here, and you can have her here. But they also said that's not going to benefit her in any way more or help her survive longer or get better access to treatment or anything like that if she was in India because there is no difference. I still don't believe that, but that was the line. And but they also said that she would have to be alone because both parents have to work here, and she would be put in a daycare or some sort of home care situation and all of that. And they also said that most of the children don't survive past the age of 13. So with all of this information and with the fact that my brother only died 15 days ago, my parents were in no emotional state to stay in a foreign country. So they made the decision to come back home. And that's where, in many ways, I feel like that in 1987 or something, around that time, interferon gamma was already discovered. So, but we came to know about it only in 1994. So there was such a lag in the information, uh, gateways also when it comes to a Western country and versus a Eastern country. In those days, not true anymore, but in those days that I'm talking about. So that impacted a lot of the decision making when it comes to medical immigration at that time. But coming back to 1994, my my doctors tried, my parents also kept on trying, and around that time, through one of the contacts that we had, and also through my cousin who was studying here at that time, he was studying for his master's. We came to know that there was this drug called interferon gamma, and it was in phase 3 clinical trial in Germany and also in the United States. And it was showing a lot of promise for people with CGD. And he said, let's try to see if we can get her into a clinical trial of some sort here. And we tried through a lot of hospitals here. And finally, at Stanford, we were managed to get some kind of a contact, and they asked us to send all the medical records. They reviewed all the medical records, and then they said, yes, she can come and be part of the clinical trial. We will like to see if she first has, because they were not, trusting that test that was done in those days. So they were like, we don't know. It looks like she has, but we cannot going to take that one test done in Canada ages ago, because we need to test it here. And if that turns out to be true, we will have her in the trial. So they sent an invite letter, and that's how you could apply for a B2 medical visa. So there is B1 is the tourist visa in the United States, and B2 is the medical visa here, that you can come here for medical treatments. So that B2 visa comes with its own rules and regulations. It says that you have to provide for your own stay here, and that you should be able to afford your medical care or prove that your medical care will be taken care of, but not at the expense of the American taxpayer. So in that way, NIH and also Stanford, they have a research program, and that within that research program, they can provide a treatment plan. It doesn't violate any of the rules of the B2 visa. So you could get a B2 visa through that means. That's how we came here. But that also does not mean that when you're staying here for the longer medical treatment, you still have to pay your own way, pay for your room, boarding, housing, all the expenses, and also some other parts of the medical treatment that are not covered by the direct. Like let's say you are sick for something else, you have to go to the doctor or anything that won't be covered. You have to pay for it out of pocket, and there is no insurance plan that will cover you. No international tourist insurance will not also cover you for that, because international tourist medical insurance plans have a pre-existing clause, and even to this day, they have the pre-existing clause. So if you have a heart disease, if you have diabetes, if you are pregnant, all of them come under pre-existing clauses, and you won't get treatment even under a tourist medical visa. And when we came here, I had no other way of doing that, only through, my parents literally sold everything in the house, everything that they owned, and came here, showed that money was in the bank, showed proof that they were not trying to immigrate here or stay here. To this day, whenever people ask me, like, um, there are many millions of people who come here for immigrating to the United States. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, they are coming here for a job or to make a better living for themselves. But to this day, I say it was not a choice for me to come here. So you can say, yeah, your life is better here. Yes, true. But it's still, that doesn't mean that it was a choice. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a choice for my parents. It wasn't a choice for me. So when we came here, we had literally nothing, and whatever save little bit of savings that we had wasn't going to last us for a very long time. And then they threw us this shocker that, hey, you have to be on this treatment for the rest of your life. It's not like it's a one shot or you take for 15 days, you're gonna be fine. So that was a big, revelation for us, and we were not aware of the cost of the drug at the time, how much it was going to be, and the cost of other treatments. Everything was new to us, and the expense, even the blood test, the cab to and fro, everything was a big deal for us. And the Indian community and the larger American community, I have to say, welcomed us with open arms and started fundraising for us. And that's how we managed to survive the first few months. And there was a pro bono legal team that came forward and helped us file for immigration papers. And around that time, Stanford and through that Genentech was at the time marketing that drug through their phase 3 clinical trial, made a promise through their patient assistance program that if I could find a way to stay here, the drug would be free.
Wow.
So that is how, so so the only onus on us was to find a way to stay here legally. And we worked on that. That's a whole other podcast on its own, because it's a long story. But to give you the nutshell of that, I was on B2 visa. I was the only one on B2 visa that stayed consecutively for 13 years on a B2 visa. It was every 6 months, the Stanford doctors, all my medical doctors team would send a large package of information to the immigration department and file. We would file every 6 months and extended it for 13 years until my green card could be filed. That and then I could actually stay here. And there was a big drama during that last year when whenever there is an administration change, there's also a immigration, staff change, and that person decided that 13 years of me staying here was no longer valid, revoked my B2 visa overnight, and asked me to get out of the country in 30 days. So we went through a whole legal battle, which went all the way up to White House, and there was a presidential intervention. There was a attorney general intervention, and through that I fought to stay back. And I had a special attorney general privilege visa status for 1.5 years in which I stayed. And then by that time, the green card was processed. And that's how I came here. That's how I am. I
Whoa.
stayed on green card for 4 years, and then I filed for my US citizenship. And there is a reason why I wanted to share that when I told you, is that there was a recently an administration change couple of years ago, and during that time there was a lot of talk in the news cycle that went completely viral on how people who come on immigration on who come here for medical treatments or offloading on the taxpayers and all of that. There was a lot of anger back, because even as a US citizen now, I would be very mad if I found out that other people from other countries are able to get medical care while we US citizens are struggling to pay for our own medical care, and everything there that we know that we are struggling in through the medical system itself, as is very, very unequal. But that misinformation is what I want to dispel. I hope through this podcast and through others, that's not the case. If you come here on on a medical visa for medical treatment, even if you come here on something called medical tourism, where it's an elective surgery that you're coming here for, you have to prove to the USCIS that you can pay for it, that you have everything set up ready, and they ask documentation for everything. So it's not like you can, my at Stanford and all my physicians for the last, I told you like 13 years, they filed proof. And
Yeah.
this is, and my parents filed proof that they could provide for me, that they had funds in their bank accounts, their tax returns, and they also had to file proof that was having medical insurance. And let me tell you this important thing, because I know we are going out of time, but I wanted to share this before Obamacare, or as we know, the, advanced,
Affordable Care Act.
yes, that one, before that came through, there was something called pre-existing condition clause in which you could not get medical insurance. And I tried everywhere through everything. I could not get medical insurance. I was denied, and I kept all the denial letters, and I filed also a case against all of the medical insurance and asking them, what can a person like me do? I am here on a B2 visa. How will I take care? And during that time, this is how guardians and angels come into your life. Somebody came to visit our house and they said, hey, do you know there is a program called MRMIP, Major Risk Medical Insurance Program, that is still there, even in California and in some other states too. If you can Google it and find out MRMIP, this is funded by the tobacco tax. So, all that extra tobacco tax, the money that is, going there, some of it goes to schools for education, but the majority of it goes through to this program. And this is called a major risk program where, people like me who cannot be part of any healthcare or marketplace plan. This whole marketplace plan came after President Obama came into power. But before that, there was, you have to go to the regular, insurance companies and ask for insurance, apply for an insurance plan. But if no matter what, wherever you are going, you are being denied and you cannot be part of Medi-Cal or Medicare or any of those Medicaid programs, then you can apply through this program, and it covers only $750,000 lifetime. Don't think year. The entire lifetime is less than a 1 million. Uh, so they cover you for that, but you have to pay $500 per month and have that insurance. My parents literally went to work and paid $500 a month for 13 years. So whenever people talk about preloading, offloading, taxpayer burden, and I'm like, no, even though this is tobacco funded, I still had to pay $500 a month to pay for my insurance. And that insurance won't cover anything, just to show proof to the immigration people that I had insurance, because
Wow.
that was a criteria
Mm-hmm.
of the
Wow.
immigration.
I thank you. I mean, you have just, again, you've educated even more than our offline conversation. I'm continuing to learn about the nuances of medical visas, and I didn't know about this program that you're sharing about. And I think it really highlights, to take it back to the context of this podcast, it highlights the challenges that individuals face. We've talked a lot about social determinants or social drivers of health, and how
Mhm.
your income, your socioeconomic status, your race, your ethnicity, your zip code, all of these things impact the quality of healthcare, not only that you have access to, but that you receive. And your story just really highlights that. And again, from a global perspective of someone living outside of the US and all of the barriers that your family had to face, but also, as you shared with us offline, the privilege, that your family had to, while I'm sure it was very difficult, the privilege to be able to sell enough items to be able to, have the money in the bank to prove to the immigration officials, and the work that your parents were able to find to be able to pay this $500 a month. So it's almost like a tale of two worlds where, you simultaneously face a lot of barriers, and there were privileges, and there was grace, and there were these amazing, as you call them, guardian angels who came to help your family, and even like having pro bono attorneys and having a case that made it all the way to the United States Attorney General. So, I mean, just such incredible stories of resilience. And again, I can't even imagine what it was like for your parents, what it was like for you all. And but you made it, like because of all of those sacrifices that all of you made, you're now here to tell your story. And I'm sure that it's not only going to be helpful for those of us who are United States citizens and had no idea of these difficulties, but I'm hoping that also others outside of the country who may find themselves in a situation similar to you and your family, that this will help to educate them about the process,
Yeah.
for being able to come to this country for medical care. Wow. Well, as we wrap up, I couldn't let this interview end without talking just a little bit about what you do in your professional life as an artificial intelligence ethicist. And again, we could talk about that. I'm sure that could be its own podcast, but I want to specifically focus on this relationship between artificial intelligence and concerns about perpetuating health inequities, health disparities, biases. And so if you can share, your perspective as an AI ethicist in terms of what maybe we should be concerned about with regard to AI, and how it's amazing, it's a wonderful thing, but it may also serve to kind of formalize some of the biases that are already present in healthcare.
Yeah, there is one of the things that maybe I can simplify it and say that AI is not all bad. The thing is that the one thing that AI can do well that humans cannot is process large amounts of data and find anomalies or find patterns within them much more easily than humans can. But at the same time, as I told you, it was, a very, even the initial studies and research that was done was on male children, males and Caucasian males and younger Caucasian males. That's usually the case. And when it's that kind of a data set, whatever anomaly or pattern you find within that, it's only going to benefit that population. In the same way that is true for all races, all genders or unique ethnicities and the metabolic systems and all the physiologies that are, different for each country and region and continent. We don't have that kind of a data now to train AI. And that is where the inequalities come in. And that is where all the algorithmic injustices, all of that, starts to flood into the system. All of the discrimination that also floods into the system. So in a way, if a few humans can make a few errors, and even that could have such an impact on one person's life, like my life, just imagine when that is scaled up a million times or thousands of million times, the way that AI is growing now. Those inequalities will be tremendously hurtful to the global population. And when I talk about the global population, I mean the global South population and the populations that are not included in the data sets. So that is one of the things that AI is, actually, it makes it a little bit more scary. We want to talk about the good things that it's going to do for the medical industry, especially detection of cancer, as as I said, not only cancer at an earlier stage, even Alzheimer's at an earlier stage, because it can just breeze through data sets in a fraction of second, which we humans cannot. But what is the data set it has in its hand? What is the data set that it's holding in its brain? It's the data set that is widely available, and that data set is homogeneous, and that data set is very narrow. And that's why when the solutions, the deployment is launched, those algorithmic solutions that we are going to see in the medical industry, it's going to be more hurtful for populations that are darker in skin color, that are coming from different, socioeconomic backgrounds, coming from different races, coming from different parts of the world. So that's where we have to be a little bit more cautious and say either we need to feed it with those data, which is very hard, it's going to take a long time, because how will you have data that is, even that also is privilege, right? We haven't talked about, as I told you, we haven't talked about the privileges and the things that come in every story. You can see there is, even in my own story, I see privilege. That privilege is also not afforded to those communities. So that data set will not be there. So they are erased and not included in the data set. So then they will not have that voice anymore.
Thank you for sharing that. And it just highlights, again, some things that we've talked about in previous episodes of Bold Conversations, which is the importance of diversifying clinical trials. There's been a lot of improvement in that area with formal laws and regulations with regard to the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, whereby, researchers now they're held to a higher standard. But of course, we still have a lot of work to do. And that's why it's so important to make sure that the trials for drugs and other new discoveries in healthcare and in medicine are reflective of our diverse population. So thank you so much. Well, Susanna, I could talk to you all day. I'm sure that our listeners would love to hear more, but we do need to bring this conversation to an end. I just want to thank you again for being so generous with sharing the story of, you as a little girl and the challenges that you faced, the tragedy and the loss that you and your parents faced with your siblings, and really just this story of perseverance and resilience as you all had to navigate this complicated medical system in the United States and the complicated medical immigration process and all of the barriers that you all faced to get you where you are today. And I'm excited about the work that you do in your professional life and your willingness to really be an ambassador for IDF. So thank you so much for your time. And maybe we'll have a chance to talk again and have a part two.
Thank you so much. I mean, your story is so inspiring, and the work that you're doing so much needed for our communities, and we are really privileged to have you in our lives.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So much.
And thank you, Zach.
All right, you all. So that's the end of this episode of Bold Conversations. We look forward to seeing you next time.